What's the point of all this? I mean, why? I don't know, sir. I don't think anybody knows. But I do know that someday this war is gonna end. Then what? We're soldiers. What happens to us then?
From the American Broadcasting Company's Bicentennial Center in New York City, Harry Reasoner.
Good morning. We're here, and we'll be here throughout the day in this red, white, and blue studio to take a look at what the second oldest major continuing nation in the world is doing to celebrate the 200th anniversary of its independence.
July 1976. The United States of America was celebrating its bicentennial, signifying 200 years of independence from the British Empire. Around the country, parties, parades, fireworks, and all manner of red, white, and blue arose in celebration of the tried and true American story of perseverance and exceptionalism. Meanwhile, in England, a new American story was in the midst of being told. One the world would soon come to know as Star Wars. George Lucas's wildly successful space opera blockbuster was widely considered a modern American classic before it even finished its theatrical run. Though it captured universal ideas about mythology, philosophy, and history through the lens of science fiction, it effectively told the story of scrappy freedom fighters taking on an autocratic empire run by British-speaking tyrants. It's the same sort of underdog story that's defined the American spirit all the way since the country's founding, and a story that has resonated with audiences the world over since 1977. However, buried beneath its black and white imagery and allusions to the great conflicts of America's past, Star Wars told a different American story, and it wasn't exactly a good one.
You did something very interesting with Star Wars, if you think about it. The good guys are the rebels. They're using asymmetric warfare against a highly organized empire. I think we call those guys terrorists today. We call them Mujahideen, we call them Al-Qaeda.
When I did it, they were Viet Cong.
While America celebrated its bicentennial in '76, Vietnam was reunified as the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, signaling the long-awaited end of the Vietnam War. Though the US pulled its troops from the country in 1973 and formally ended their involvement in Vietnam in 1975, America would spend the remainder of the '70s and the years beyond to fully grasp the impact the war had on the American identity. What was once largely understood as a necessary crusade to halt the spread of communism in Southeast Asia and propagate a democratic government had eroded to the shameful intervention of a new colonialist power in a relatively contained civil war between North and South Vietnam. That neo-colonialist power, in the eyes of the Viet Cong anyway, was America. And leading America into Vietnam was Richard Nixon, who Lucas has long cited as an inspiration for Emperor Palpatine. By its conclusion, the Vietnam War was deeply unpopular among many Americans, many of whom believed America's leadership both lied to the country about the nature of its involvement and led them into a war of diminishing returns. Like many great works of fiction for the time, Star Wars held up a mirror, fueled by the prevailing skepticism that America was not the inherent good guy, but rather the villain. Yet, that wasn't exactly the narrative audiences latched onto by the end of the original Star Wars trilogy, and definitely not after the prequel trilogy of episodes 1, 2, and 3, a story ultimately about the totalitarian transition of a republic into an empire, spearheaded by a deceptive politician and a public servant corrupted by power. Instead, the prequels were initially maligned for straying from the idyllic battle of good and evil depicted in the original films. The good guys were harder to root for, the villains operated from the shadows, there was a lot of politics, and the dialogue was kinda weird. And to be fair, that last complaint is a little valid. For a multitude of reasons, American audiences rejected the prequels. Yet, beneath its digital cogs and whistles, The prequels once again echoed that though Star Wars' ideas are universally applicable to governments, empires, and individuals throughout time and history, it has always also been an American story. It was the case throughout the Skywalker saga, the case during Lucas and Dave Filoni's groundbreaking run on Star Wars The Clone Wars, and it continues to be the case in Lucasfilm Animation's Star Wars The Bad Batch. Originally created by George Lucas as the Star Wars version of the A-Team, the Bad Batch are probably some of the weirdest Star Wars characters ever created. A group of specially mutated clone soldiers led by Hunter, a bandana-wearing expert tracker inspired by Billy Soul from the 1987 film Predator. Though they were set to debut during the original run of the Clone Wars, audiences wouldn't be formally introduced to the Bad Batch until February 2020 for the final revival season of the series. Before then, the Bad Batch were known only from unfinished reels from the original run of the Clone Wars, a symbol of hope for the show's one-day return.
Every story meeting I go into with Matt, we'd be pitching something. He'd be, yeah, but I think like at the end here, maybe the Bad Batch comes in and saves them. I'm like, Matt, they haven't had anything to do. It's been 3 episodes. They just can't come out of nowhere. Yeah, I know, but just think about it. If the Bad Batch came in that wicked cool shuttle, I'm like, Matt, they don't have anything to do with this. If you do that one more time, you're going to get thrown out of the room. And all the time, the Bad Batch would be in the middle of discussing an Ahsoka story. He's like, yeah, I think when she's in the situation, the Bad Batch should come in. I'm like, they're on the other side of the galaxy doing nothing. They don't even know her. This is like completely, why would they be there? Well, it just might be cool. For years, I've dealt with this. So finally, are you happy? Here it is.
I'm very happy.
Now
Thank
they
you.
all know about the Bad Batch.
It paid off.
As fate had it, the Bad Batch would not only champion the return of the Clone Wars, but their very own spin-off series, crafted with the stunningly beautiful visual style of its predecessor. Though Lucas is no longer involved with the Batch's future stories, and even Dave Filoni's involvement in the show's production is limited, the Batch's legacy continues under the guidance of supervising director Brad Rau, lead writer Jennifer Corbett, and story editor Matt Miknovitz, who co-wrote the original Bad Batch arc of the Clone Wars with Brent Friedman. And of course, like with every clone in the Clone Wars, the entire batch is maddeningly voiced by D. Bradley Baker.
Relax, Wrecker. You'll top him next time. No, he won't.
On its surface, the Bad Batch series is, as the characters were created, a Star Wars homage to the Dirty Dozen or the A-Team, the misadventures of war veterans on the run from the Empire, using their wits and ability to overcome virtually any situation. Alternatively, the show helps close the gap between the prequel trilogy and original trilogy, or at least the Clone Wars and Rebels, depicting the galaxy-wide descent into the dark times on the backs of relatively light-hearted characters. But I would argue that the Bad Batch is simply too weird for that, in a good way. Too weird to only be another connector in the Star Wars timeline, and too weird to only be the A-Team. Much like the Star Wars stories that precede it, a different story is buried within the show. And if you've seen it, you know that. With the call of Order 66, the rebellion of clones against the Empire, and the fate of Kamino, the first season of The Bad Batch clearly has a lot to say about its soldiers. But between the Batch's odd jobs for Sid, a marathon of familiar Star Wars faces, and the inclusion of Omega, what it has to say isn't always clear. Nevertheless, it's a story Corbett, Rau, and Miknovitz were keen to tell, and for good reason. One that, if viewed through the right lens, provokes a call to action about the necessity of compassion. But I'm getting too ahead of myself, because you can't talk about the Bad Batch without first talking about the Clone Wars. Here on our tour, I tell stories about your favorite video games, shows, movies, and more. But I wouldn't be able to do any part of that without a safe and reliable internet connection. And normally, I have one, but not like I do with NordVPN. NordVPN protects my online privacy and hides my IP address from public networks with next-generation encryption. With NordVPN, I can connect to other countries and stream movies or shows I normally wouldn't be able to. And with NordVPN's cybersec technology, I can block ads and dangerous malware without breaking a sweat. The best part? It takes literally a single click. At the very least, it beats having a chain code.
It's ingenious. Glad you're impressed.
If you'd like to try NordVPN, then I'm your guy. Go to nordvpn.com/RTOR and enter the code RTOR at checkout to get a huge discount on a 2-year plan. And because of NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee, there's no harm in giving it a try. The link to this limited time offer is in the description below. Now,
Where were we?
to anyone who's seen it, The Clone Wars is an essential companion piece to the prequels, exploring in greater depth the fall of the Republic from the perspectives of a whole galaxy of characters. From those perspectives, we can initially glean that the Clone Wars is a fairly black and white conflict. We might even refer to it as a just war, fought for morally justified reasons. Led by noble Jedi generals, the Grand Army of the Republic fought to defend worlds from separatist enslavement, the manipulation of political leaders, and the overthrow of the Sovereign Republic. If there's any conflict in Star Wars that could be likened to World War II, a just war from the Allies' perspective, it's gotta be the Clone Wars. The joining of the Confederacy of Independent Systems is akin to World War II's axis of power, while the creation of the Clone Army equates to the Allies' drafting of troops. The war is full of shining examples of heroism, inspiring leadership, and sacrifice, especially among the clones.
Live to fight another day.
Until the Clone Wars, who the clones were as people was never heavily defined outside of a few books and comics. As it turns out, in spite of all sharing the same face, the clones are remarkably diverse. Some are determined to follow orders to an absolute T, like Dogma or Echo. Others are a bit more radical, going against orders to achieve victory, like Hardcase and Fives. Some simply don't believe in the cause they're fighting for, like Slick or Cut LaQuaine. But most exhibit a strong sense of pride and patriotism for the Republic, a la the American draftee during World War II.
Military personnel have a huge affinity for the clones. It really struck a chord with military families because that idea of being part of a whole but also an individual strikes a very important chord for them.
However, as the show steps outside of the battlefield and into the Senate chambers, the audience receives a very different perspective of the war. That is, from the Star Wars equivalent of the military-industrial complex. The Republic economy is in shambles. Greedy bankers are profiting from the production of both droids and clones, and lawmakers are secretly betraying the needs of their people for personal gain. As a result, the subterranean populace of Coruscant is plunged into poverty and strapped for basic services.
Like so many of the people that we tell ourselves we're here to serve, Tekla lives in a district that rarely has electricity and running water as a result of the war. Her children can now only bathe every 2 weeks, and they have no light in which to read or study at night.
Over time, the public attitude begins to shift. No longer supportive of the war, the people of Coruscant largely turn against the supposed peacekeeping Jedi, who they believe are perpetuating the conflict. The Jedi aren't perfect, and are perhaps farther than they've ever been from their compassionate roots, but in being too thinly spread by Count Dooku's galaxy-spanning droid army, the Jedi become an easy target for the public. Even the clones are put into question, especially in the Senate, where clones are not regarded as brave draftees, but as numbers and products. In this sense, the clones are not the Ally soldiers, but a private military or mercenary army, like the Hessians hired by Britain during the American Revolution, making the Kaminoan scientists who created the clones private military contractors. This comparison is even more valid if you consider that all clones were originally cloned from a mercenary. The mercenary army was, in fact, a much derided concept among America's founding fathers when outlining the country's method of military defense. George Washington was particularly distrusting of mercenaries, finding them inferior to the citizen soldier, someone who will fight to defend their own community from foreign invaders and tyrants. Today, organizations like Blackwater or the Wagner Group persist as deadly mercenary armies, but are largely held in suspicion due to their perceived lack of patriotism and numerous scandals tied to their contractors. Though the clones are never as heavily scrutinized as the Jedi, and never short on the personal courage that comes from defending one's community, there is an evident disconnect between the Republic and its clones. And where the schism was once only apparent on Coruscant, it begins to carry back onto the battlefield in the latter portion of the show. On Lola Sayu, as Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka rescue Even Peel from the Citadel, Peel's second-in-command, Tarkin, is expressly cynical about the Jedi. He believes they should be relieved from battlefield duty, as they aren't willing to do what's necessary to win the war. The Queen of Zygeria, Baraj Sintel, echoes a similar cynicism to Anakin, suggesting that his commitment to the Jedi ways are holding him back from his true potential. And on Umbara, Captain Rex and the 501st Legion are led into certain death and pitted against one another by the power-drunk Pong Krell. Though Krell is an aspiring separatist recruit, his attitude towards the clones was already blatantly apathetic.
Because I can. Because you fell for it. Because you're inferior.
Worst of all, the war is largely fueled by a continuing string of lies and oversights. The separatists on Raxus are not the warmongers the Republic make them out to be, instead seeking a peaceful secession from the Republic and abiding by a parliamentary system of governance. The Jedi Council lies to Anakin about Obi-Wan's undercover operation and ousts Ahsoka as the culprit of the Jedi Temple bombing in order to appear more favorably to a military tribunal. On top of it all are Palpatine's incessant lies, manipulation of the war, and attempts to stoke fear throughout the Republic, which invariably affords him more and more executive power to appease the people's fears. Ultimately, years after it has passed, the Clone Wars will be remembered by its galaxy as a war of mistruths, fought for morally dubious reasons. Or, per the doctrine we described earlier, an unjust war, like Vietnam or the war in Iraq, which many compared the Clone Wars to during the release of the prequels. The biggest lie of the Clone Wars, however, is the one told to its soldiers, the inhibitor chip, installed in the brain of every clone. Not only because its very existence is concealed from the clones, but because it instills a lie incontestably in the conscience of every single clone, that the Jedi are traitors. By war's end, with the separatist threat nearly extinguished, public opinion turned against the Jedi, and a Senate benefiting from the suffering of trillions, only one obstacle remains in the revenge of the Sith. The only way to eliminate that obstacle is with a lie, one that will turn an army of heroic soldiers into mindless killers.
Execute Order 66.
From the smoke of Order 66 emerges a very different galaxy, ruled by a tyrannical empire. The story of the Clone Wars could have ended there, a parable about the failures of democracy and the tragedy that befell its defenders. But there's more to it than that. When America's campaign in Vietnam came to an end in 1973, and the country was left to reel from its own war of mistruths, one community was fatally overlooked, and in some regards, continues to be overlooked even today. And that was the American veteran. Where the Bad Batch picks up is with their story.
How many are there?
5 of them.
5? We're done.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But you gotta see these clones. They're different.
Fire! Hold your position!
These are the members of Clone Force 99. Wrecker, Hunter, Echo, Tech, and Crosshair. And they're pretty much just as you remember them from the Clone Wars. They treat combat like Dungeons and Dragons, they're horrible communicators.
Well, I thought it was obvious.
And they're wildly independent, though still loyal to the Republic. What's interesting about these characters is that, despite being the biggest proprietors of the Clone Wars' legacy, they couldn't be less engrossed in pretty much everything the show was about. They're not very invested in the bureaucracy they serve on Coruscant, the going-ons of the Jedi, the ramifications of the war, and, to an extent, even their fellow brothers in the Clone Army, or as they call them, Regs. Even Grievous's defeat on Utapau reads them like a Facebook update, an event with no intrinsic significance other than the strategic end of the war. All they truly care about is completing their mission, serving the exact purpose they were created for, and thankfully, they're damn good at that.
Any orders? Or shall we do what we do?
Let's blow something up! Yeah!
But in fighting the battles and serving the Republic, they are invariably affected by the greater whole, the machinations behind the war. So while they are unknowingly immune to the effects of the inhibitor chip, the impact it has on the galaxy will, in turn, impact them. Order 66 is retold through the young eyes of Caleb Doom, who will carry the trauma of his master's death and the clone's betrayal for the rest of his life. Despite the batch's attempts to help Caleb, or give him a shot at survival, Caleb's reactions send one clear message. He doesn't trust them, even if they're not responsible for what happened. His pervasive distrust signals a disturbing shift taking place across the galaxy. Not just the changing of the guard, but something much worse. With the war at an end, the Batch are called back to the clone homeworld of Kamino. However, home has perhaps never been more unwelcoming or unrecognizable for the Batch. Jedi overseers like Shaak Ti have disappeared, the clones have been depersonalized, and even their value has been questioned. Worst of all, every clone is seemingly unaware of the horror they carried out, completely subservient to the new Empire, almost as if nothing really changed. And indeed, after testing combat, it's seemingly back to business as usual when Tarkin sends the Batch to eliminate insurgents on Onderon. But it's not until the Batch have stared down their targets through the scope of a rifle that they fully grasp this new reality.
We expected to find battle droids, not
civilians. Times change, targets change. Why don't you take a look at the insurgents you were sent to destroy? Makes you wonder what else they're lying about.
With an army of mindless clones at Palpatine's command, and virtually no valiant leaders to stop him, Jedi or otherwise, the galaxy has been plunged into a new era marked by the dissolution of compassion. Chain codes will be assigned and used to invade civilian privacy, clones will become a glorified foreign police force, and any contrarian to the Empire's goals will be considered a threat. And of course, as it occurred during the Clone Wars, lies will divide the public, but to the fullest, most irreversible extent possible. To much of the Republic, this tide of imperialization will register as a good thing, bringing them safety and security via the Empire's control over the galaxy. But to anyone willing to critically discern the transition taking place, they will see this for what it truly is, a war of hegemony, to assert economic, military, and political predominance over every planet across the galaxy. To the American story, these are the imperialistic tendencies that Lucas was so critical of in his early work on Star Wars. That Americans were not viewed as liberators to the people of Vietnam, but occupiers with the goal of asserting control over the government in Saigon, disguised as the noble proliferation of democracy. Similarly, the Bad Batch reflects the American GIs caught in the middle. Expected to follow orders without question, many American soldiers were unknowingly contributing to a horrible occupation, and expected to eradicate the Jedi and pledge unflinching loyalty to the Empire, the inhibitor chip-induced clones have a lot more in common with America's Vietnam fighters than one might think. Without good leaders to guide them, the clones have been left to fend for their own morality. Though the Bad Batch have always been driven by a mission, they also understand the difference between right and wrong. But like so many others under the thumb of imperialization, their privilege to discern doesn't necessarily afford them the ability to choose, not without consequences. Instead, they have an ultimatum.
You can either adapt and survive, or die with the past. The decision is yours.
However grim the consequences might be for going against the Empire, the Batch accepts them head-on. Yet, almost immediately, Hunter faces the repercussions. Of a time of stark division, the Bad Batch is not immune.
Those insurgents are plotting against the Emperor. If you don't have the stomach to do what needs to be done, then you're not fit to lead this squad.
Even without his partially effective inhibitor chip, Crosshair's descent with the Batch cuts deeply. Still tied up in the same mission-driven mentality that has long compelled the Batch, he is a dangerous representation of the alternative, refusing to change, even to the detriment of one's values. Composer Kevin Kiner imbues this refusal in Crosshair's theme, as teeth-gnashing synths slowly build into violent pulses, representing the all-but physical tension of holding on to something that is slowly erasing your identity. Because if you're not careful, after a while, what you will become will be just as unrecognizable as the cause you've sworn allegiance to. The rest of Clone Force 99 adheres to the opposite. Without a place to truly call home or a mission to confide in, they leave Kamino and the Republic behind them. Save for one small thing. Omega.
Me?
What do you say, kid? You want to come with us? Or did we get captured for nothing?
Omega, like the Batch, is an oddity among the clones. Bred not for war, but as genetic insurance for Jango's DNA, Omega is quite valuable to the Kaminoans. But that's not what makes her valuable to the Batch. Where Omega may have once called the labs and barracks of brave clone soldiers on Kamino her home, the tide of the Empire now threatens to erase any trace of goodness that lingers on in Tapoka City's halls. It's no place for a child. And having witnessed firsthand the harm this change has inflicted to a child like Caleb, Hunter and his squad recognize this. Thus, a new mission begins for the Bad Batch, protecting Omega, even if they're not yet fully equipped to do so. In time, what she will symbolize to the Batch will become far more important. In an age otherwise absolved of conventional morality, Omega is a reminder of the good. Her appropriately childlike persistence to believe in it is a fleeting hope that the era of good that once was is not gone forever. And because of that, what she brings out of the Batch will inspire a difference. Where Crosshair's theme was mechanical and rigid, Omega's is the opposite. An expression of childlike adventure, rare compassion, and effervescent hope. That hope will go with her and the Batch as they set off into an uncertain future. Hope for a life after war, hope for the changing of hearts and minds, and hope for a home better than the one they've left behind. Before her career in writing for shows like NCIS, Golden Boy, and now Star Wars The Bad Batch, Jennifer Corbett served in the US Navy as one of 2 female officers aboard a ship of 400 sailors. In an interview with Christian Baver on StarWars.com, she elaborates on her military service in that, quote, "You spend so much time together that you work as a unit. You rely on the person next to you. You have to trust them with your life," end quote. Corbett's sincere understanding of military camaraderie no doubt played a vital role in how she wrote The Bad Batch, Special Forces fighters turned soldiers of fortune. Though their interactions are dominated by Wrecker's goofiness, Tech's know-it-all attitude, and Echo's occasional sass,
I am worth more than 2,000.
They're all capable of working and surviving together. In some ways, their ostracization from the other clones, in spite of being highly skilled, is reminiscent of a group like the Tuskegee Airmen of World War II, specialized fighter pilots who faced discrimination from within and outside the Army. They were also the subject of another Lucasfilm project. Like the A-Team, the Batch are surviving vets of a morally dubious war, running from the government to avoid unjust scrutiny. And if we consider the post-war vilification of Vietnam veterans, Hunter has a lot more in common with First Blood's John Rambo than he does Predator's Billy Soul.
Well, look, John, we can't have you running around out there wasting friendly civilians.
There are no friendly civilians.
But beyond any comparison, what's most important about the batch, and what Corbett reminds the audience of so often, is that they're human. They have to conserve rations, find their own fuel, repair their ship, pay off debts, and of course, provide for Omega, all while staying out of trouble. It parallels the difficulties many American veterans experience in getting the care they need at home, and what many veterans experienced after Vietnam. In that vein, Omega embodies the reality of raising a family after war, and the Havoc Marauder, their trusty ship, is the car that family lives out of. If we take this comparison one step further, the Bad Batch are not entirely dissimilar from US veterans discharged as other than honorable, or OTH, a designation given to servicemen and women who exhibit a behavior of misconduct deemed disruptive to their military service. Veterans who receive this designation are not only denied federal job opportunities, but unable to receive many benefits from the Department of Veteran Affairs. The uglier flip side of this designation is that, no different from any other honorably discharged veteran, several OTH veterans still suffer from a mental illness like post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury, sometimes to a worse extent, considering the shame OTH veterans receive from the rest of the veteran community for not being honorable. And yet, many of them will never get the care they need without finding their own source of income. I think the Batch's misconduct towards the Empire would definitely score them a far worse designation than OTH, but for all their heroics in the Clone War, they should be no less deserving of care. Where many veterans have struggled to meet their needs after returning from war, the Bad Batch will struggle in the criminal underworld, where the work demands little of their morality and their skills in battle are valued for mercenary work, a full circle journey from the mercenary they were cloned from. Finding themselves at the employment of Grand Lizard Sid, the Batch carry out the oddest of jobs, intercepting Jabba's Rancor Muchi, stealing back Ruby from space pirates, or snagging a tactical droid head from familiar Coruscant freelancers. At first, the work helps them get by with few repercussions, but there are some needs that even underworld work can't cover, that no matter how far in the rear view their military service becomes, there's little escaping the call of Order 66. Initially immune to the effects of his inhibitor chip, repeated injury and insufficient care are what slowly push Wrecker into a violent, uncontrollable war state, symptomatic of Order 66. In the Clone Wars, we might know this war state as a nightmare, the mission in our dreams, and upon death, that nightmare is finally, graciously over. Though the Batch presume they're safe from the chip, Rex vehemently insists otherwise, not until it's removed from their head. And removing it from one's head is a potentially fatal maneuver, requiring specific, almost unattainable medical equipment. The inhibitor chip isn't just a metaphor for complacent servitude to the Empire. It's an analogy for PTSD, the mental affliction that befalls an estimated 15% of all veterans. According to a report published by the Cost of War Project this past June, many of the causes for PTSD are unavoidable and complex. High exposure to trauma, mental, physical, moral, and sexual, stress and burnout, the influence of the military's hegemonic masculine culture, continued access to guns, and the difficulty of reintegrating into civilian life. The report further identifies the military's tendency to overburden individual service members with moral responsibility or blameworthiness for actions or consequences over which they have little control, as well as a culture where acknowledging mental illness is likely to be viewed as a sign of weakness and a potential threat to their careers. Corbett's approach to the chip in no way depicts an exact representation of PTSD, the real-world severity of its effects, nor a model for treatment, but similar to the figurative depictions of PTSD already in Star Wars media, many connections can be made between the activated mental state of the Clone Army and the mental health crisis afflicting America's veteran population. So no matter the passage of time since Order 66, or the willpower one might possess, if left unattended, the inhibitor chip might trigger an attack indiscriminately.
You're in direct violation of Order 66.
Fortunately, the Batch are able to get the treatment they need. Not just by having the right medical equipment, but by having the right support group. It was Omega who gave Wrecker pause at the height of his episode and stood by his side through his entire surgery, while Rex was the one who subdued Wrecker and ultimately encouraged the batch to get help in the first place, emerging as the de facto clone support group leader of a post-Clone Wars galaxy. Unfortunately, the rest of the clone army is not privy to the same care, even amidst their service, and obviously, the Empire would never want to remove their chip anyway. Already considered a liability of cost by Tarkin, the Empire's long-term treatment of the clones denotes a prevalent hypocrisy about America's treatment of veterans. Despite initiating the war and drafting the troops, the government isn't entirely willing to foot the bill incurred by their service. The VA at large is equipped to combat this problem through multiple forms of care, but it has shortcomings. Due to the high load of compensation claims by veterans made yearly, the VA prioritizes processing as many claims as possible in a set period, neglecting lengthier claims with more complex circumstances to the back of their queue, forcing many veterans to pay for the medical help they need out of pocket. There's also the tens of millions in bonuses the VA pays out to its executives and employees every year, despite how many veterans still go without compensation. But certain costs run deeper and can't be addressed monetarily. Scars both physical and mental, and the immense difficulty of finding a new purpose other than the one you were trained for. In many areas, America's system is not designed to support veterans, and the Empire's is not designed to support clones either. Though the batch benefited from Rex's care, his mission to help the clones won't end here. The batch could join him too, but Hunter is too reluctant to yet join his cause.
Omega needs us, and I have to do what's best for my squad. Which is what? I'm still figuring that out. I guess we all are.
Deprived of the Republic's stability, forced to rely on an uncaring underworld entrusted to protect Omega, and dejected by the betrayal of his brother, is it implausible to suggest Hunter feels he has nothing left to give? That, as sad as it is to say, merely getting by is victory enough for Hunter? Because if that is his only aim, the apathetic galaxy that now surrounds him is bound to gun him down. Saul's grim omen on Onderon has never rang truer. The old ways are gone. Gone with peacekeepers, caregivers, and heroes alike, while greed, chaos, and unchecked power ruled the galaxy. It's no place for a retired soldier, and less so for one with a conscience. Without abiding to the morally inept times, the batch are destined to die with the past, lost to a conflict where every soldier was nothing more than a stepping stone to a dictator's rise to power. Death can't be their legacy, but what other choice do they have? As it turns out, there is a third option beyond Saul's ultimatum, even for clones indentured to the Empire. The inhibitor chip may prevent the clones from moving on from the war they fought, or the atrocities they've committed under the Empire, but it can't suppress a declaration of humanity. Captain Hauser, a man who has found purpose not in being a loyal soldier, but loyal to the good he can achieve, shows us the way.
Brothers, what are we doing? We came here to free Ryloth from Separatist control, and we succeeded. But look around you. We're now being ordered to target the very people we swore to protect, and I will not be a part of it any longer.
Hauser's sacrifice is a miraculous game changer in the tragedy of the clones. The inhibitor chip no longer has to define who they are, nor must they accept the standing army they've devolved to. Collectively rejecting the Empire's orders won't improve how the clones are treated, and will certainly result in punishment. Yet, through Hauser, the clones have gained an ineffably powerful resource of their own: hope, capable of inspiring others to change, to run, to fight back even. All it takes is a bit of belief. For Hunter, Omega, and the rest of the batch, that hope could mean Crosshair is not lost forever. With his own dose of belief, Crosshair might just return to his squad and repair the divide sown between them. But Hauser's defiance is not a symbol to every soldier, nor is every soldier victimized by their circumstances. Sometimes, something worse emerges from the shadow of war. Adrift in an Imperial-controlled galaxy, it would be remiss to say the Batch haven't accomplished some good along the way. In helping Cut Lawquane and his family escape Seleucami, rescuing Senator Avi Singh from Imperial occupation, and freeing Cham Syndulla from Imperial arrest, the Batch come to realize that, though they are former soldiers, they aren't alone in some of their struggles. All over the galaxy, the communities many once called home are being divided by distrust and relieved of compassionate leadership. Yet, the Batch have thus far only been willing to stick their neck out so far. Empathy comes at a cost, one transacted by the Empire. And already too beleaguered by the cost of survival, Hunter isn't keen to pay it. But maybe the reward of one pursuit outweighs the trade-off of all others: redemption. When Rex calls upon the Batch to rescue Gregor, it isn't just an opportunity to help another clone who's lost his way from home, but a chance for the Batch to prove themselves.
You did that on Skako Minor when you rescued me. I'd still be trapped in that place if you hadn't. If there's a chance that trooper's being held against his will, we have to try to get him out.
Fixing the galaxy has gotta start somewhere, even if that change is practically microscopic. Yet, what the Batch will find in the Imperial bunker on Darrow is sure to challenge whatever shred of hope they've mustered for this mission.
These are not clone troopers.
That's what I've been trying to tell you. These are our replacements.
We know them as stormtroopers, and the Batch will know them as the replacements, but what this revelation signifies is far more unsettling than anyone in the Batch fully yet realizes. This is the first line of Imperial conscripts, the citizen soldiers America's founding fathers held in high regard, but assembled here for the most disturbing of reasons. They weren't engineered to serve, nor do they have an inhibitor chip. Quite simply, they've demonstrated an active willingness to defend the Empire. It wouldn't be at all surprising if this were a video game, and we had the toys of the Empire's arsenal dangled in front of our face. But for our characters, this is reality, one paralleled most directly by the volunteer enlistment of Adolf Hitler's Wehrmacht, men who confided in their fears boast of nationalism and intolerance. Given the many pre-existing similarities between the Nazi Party and the Empire already in Star Wars, it's not unlikely to assume these TK troopers were swayed by similar rhetoric. Palpatine's jest of a safe society, free from the alleged warmongering of the Jedi. Though they believe they are building toward a truly unified society, the vision for that society isn't designed for everyone. Certainly not Gregor, the Bad Batch, or many of the people they've helped, antithetical to the individuality the clones once embodied. Instead, with these TK troopers, the Empire has begun to fully weaponize the fear and anger that it's long sown among the public. And without a morally unified force to stop it, Hunter is engulfed by all too familiar flames, the type of raging fire that destroyed the Jedi. Extracting Gregor was a test for the Batch, but saving Hunter is their ultimate mission. And though they've already sworn off the cloning facilities they've once called home, there's no length the Bad Batch won't go to protect the only home they've got left. John Williams' Camino theme once welcomed audiences to a mysterious world never seen before in Star Wars. As Kiner reuses Williams' theme for the finale, Camino might as well be as unrecognizable as the first time we saw it, utterly devoid of a clone presence. As Crosshair escorts Hunter through the facility, we're greeted with another potential Star Wars hallmark, the capture of the hero and redemption of the villain, like with Luke and Vader or Rey and Kylo. If there's ever been an opportunity for Hunter to seek redemption, it is now with his former squad mates. But Corbett and Miknovitz defer to something more human, more difficult, something darker. Crosshair isn't the Empire's puppet, and his truth hasn't been manipulated. Crosshair chose his darkness.
We're loyal to each other, not some empire.
You weren't loyal to me.
Nothing rivals the collective surprise we felt when Crosshair refused Hunter's leadership, willfully removed his chip, and still conceded to the Empire's cause. At the same time, some of us weren't surprised in the slightest. perhaps realizing early on that this was the inevitable trajectory for Crosshair, from as far back as his introduction in the final season of The Clone Wars, when he first spewed his dislike for Regs, or in the mess halls of Kamino in Aftermath, where even outside the battlefield, Crosshair quietly sat alone. Where the rest of the batch dealt with their ostracization from the Regs, and from the galaxy really, through their shared bond with each other, Crosshair processed it differently. He processed it distantly. His skills in battle, his power, his ability to complete the mission with unrivaled execution makes him superior. He never had to be understood, just respected. And now with a government in place that values power and the individuals who possess it over virtually everything else, Crosshair can be feared. Because of the Empire, his intolerances, lack of compassion, and pervasive superiority are all vindicated.
The Empire can't protect the galaxy without strength. This is what we were made for. Think of all we could do together.
This isn't just the hegemonic soul of the American military-industrial complex. This is someone a lot of us know, that with the radical changing of the guard in our own world governments, the type of laws and leadership that are brought to the forefront enables a long silent, intolerant crowd. Whether their radical views about human nature, society's greatest threats, or the other come from diluted truths or deeply nested insecurities, they feel their dissent passionately, and are maybe even willing to fight for it. For Crosshair, as it is for these people, it doesn't matter if he was tricked or if he even sees his actions as just. The level of conviction alone that he places in knowingly evil things makes him one of the most menacing and important villains in the Star Wars canon. Crosshair is real. He's the friend with flagrant views, or the coworker who spews intolerant ideas in the back room. He might even be the family member everyone avoids when a touchy subject comes up at the dinner table. Even still, for the batch, he's their brother. And under these circumstances, how that will affect them is an impossible thing to face. For the time being, it might be best not to deal with it at all. But little does the batch realize that by simply coming here, they made a damning choice. It was the right one, but it comes with unavoidable consequences. Saul once touted that the old ways were gone. Gone with noble peacekeepers, glorious causes, scientific miracles, and shared interest in the common good. Instead, the dissolution of morals in order through destruction. As series editor Nate Cormier cuts between the startlingly lifeless, static rooms and chambers of Kamino, the once proud birthplace of the clones resigns to the sad end of an era. The end of a generation's childhood, an end to romantics, and an end to nostalgia. Gone is the light of the galaxy's greatest defenders. So begins the Dark Times. Whatever stitch and thread of compassion left holding the suspended facilities, halls, barracks, and labs of Topoka City together is catastrophically decimated by Rampart's barrage and sent to the bottom of the ocean floor. The Bad Batch, the unyielding symbols of individuality among the clones, are part of that destruction. Saul warned them all from the start, and now the Batch will pay the steepest cost of anything suffered from the Empire, dying with the past. Every scrap of Kamino that crumbles around them violently demands the same hopeless answer given to the Empire's grip over the galaxy: submission. Their only option for survival, their only hope, is by impossibly working together. To truly emerge from this cleansing fire intact requires an act of rebirth, rising from the watery underworld in the very same pods the Batch were created in. And they can only do so with AZ-3. the same proof of individuality that they were for Fives in the Clone Wars, and perhaps the Kaminoans' last servant of creation. Their sacrifice wouldn't have gone in vain, but they deserve far better than sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Omega doesn't just risk her life for a droid, she risks it on principle. Because against the coming tide of amorality, it's a righteous act, a final test of the Batch's own sense of humanity. Of course, Hunter would risk everything for Omega, but would Crosshair? As it plays out, the rebirth of the Batch wasn't about Hunter, Wrecker, Tech, Echo, or Omega. It was about Crosshair. But why? Why, if even for a moment, exhibit some sense of right, commit an act of selflessness when it reciprocates no personal gain? Perhaps it was done out of spite, to prove to the Batch that he can change, and make decisions that result from his own volition of will, rather than how he was created. Maybe that only matters to him because deep down, he wants to change. Not necessarily to abandon his intolerances or the power enabled to him, but to be one with his clone family once again. And perhaps the reason he even believes in that is because, unlike everyone else, Omega is the only one who does believe in him. She's the only one willing to fight for him, even when it's downright inconvenient to do so. Just as Luke redeems Vader in Return of the Jedi, Omega redeems a small part of Crosshair. At least, for a moment. The nightmare is finally over. Where the halls and dorms housing the Republic's valiant soldiers formed a beaming lighthouse against the terrorizing storms and oppressive darkness that surrounded the clone's creation, Kamino finally rests in peace, freed from the Sith's manipulation. At the same time, it's a farewell to home for every clone across the galaxy, including Omega. The shot of her watching the plumes of smoke rising from Tapoka City's ruins invokes Luke watching the ruin of Owen and Bru's homestead in A New Hope, the last time he bid farewell to home, and set off on a heroic journey. There's no knowing exactly what triumphs, challenges, or failures lie in store for Omega, but she won't be facing them alone. After all, the Empire destroyed Kamino, but they couldn't destroy her true home, Clone Force 99. And if there's anything Rao and Corbett have shown us this season, it's that family, the most honest home we can have, is the vessel through which we can endure our darkest voyages in life. It just takes a bit of compromise, sacrifice, and love. All rare things to come by in the Empire's galaxy, but no less capable of coming from within. But this home is still divided. Crosshair stubbornly refuses to rejoin the Batch and refuses to change his ways. Power is seemingly more important to him than having his family. And to be fair, if he did join, a lot of compromises would need to be made. Possibly too many. It would be far simpler to concede to what Tech argued in the tunnels, that Crosshair can't change who he is, and they can't change who he is. It's easier to let him be difficult than to take the steps to help him through his insecurities or dispel his intolerances. But the Batch are the only family Crosshair may ever have. That's gotta mean something.
You're still their brother, Crosshair. You're my brother too.
Season 1 doesn't provide an answer to this dilemma, and frankly, I don't think many of us could either. The right thing is obvious, but achieving it, especially if it's for our own dissident family member, is an uphill battle. However, if the Batch's determination to survive means anything, if the legacy of the brave soldiers of the Republic is worth a damn, then we can live to fight another day, hoping, building, and fighting for the core of what matters most, the home that connects us all.
I'd love if you could both give me one thing, whether it's a bit about character development or just Star Wars lore or anything in between, something that you learned from Dave Filoni that you kind of take with you whenever you're working on anything Star Wars related.
I remember him saying, if you can't relate what you're saying in this episode to the real world, then you shouldn't be telling this story, because, you know, even though you're dealing with Star Wars, it needs to be grounded in some sort of reality. Otherwise, you're just, you know, playing in a place that you shouldn't. So I feel like that's how we're keeping it true to what Star Wars really is.
A couple weeks ago, after the season finale of Star Wars The Bad Batch, I asked you all what you thought of the show's first season. Many of you enjoyed it overall, but felt the season lacked in some areas. There were too many filler Sid episodes, Echo didn't have a whole lot to do, the Batch didn't develop much as characters outside of Hunter and Crosshair, and the plot meandered far more than it needed to. Looking back on these 16 episodes, I can't deny that some of these complaints are valid. However, at the same time, I'd be lying if I didn't say that, personally, I loved the first season of Star Wars The Bad Batch. Beyond having new Star Wars animation to tune into every Friday once again, it's been a blast to see the all-star crew of Lucasfilm Animation and CGCG flex their muscles every single week in visual, sound, music, and storytelling at a pace and production still unrivaled by any other televised 3D animation studio out there. Seeing new characters like Rampart, Hauser, and Omega join the fold of already beloved characters like Cad Bane, Hera, and Tarkin has been nothing less than a delight. The clones are undoubtedly some of the most interesting characters in all of Star Wars, and seeing their fates explored in the aftermath of the Clone Wars has been equal parts entertaining as it has been meaningful. And though they surely have a long road ahead of them, I'd like to think the Bad Batch are well on their way to becoming iconic characters synonymous with the Star Wars name. Getting a season 2 is not only proof that fans are willing to invest in otherwise obscure characters, but proof that Jennifer Corbett, Matt Miknovitz, and Dave Filoni have more story yet to tell. And if the trajectory of season 1 is any indication, there's hopefully a lot of story left to tell. Whether that story continues its thoughtful reflection on the lives of veterans, the communities we share, and the forms of division and distrust that tear them apart, or diverges in a different, yet still meaningful direction, I have to express my gratitude for the story Season 1 told nonetheless. One in which a group of truly remarkable people are undervalued by their society and pushed to the breaking point just to survive. Yet, because of their bond with each other and capacity to do right by each other, they ultimately carve out a small space of comfort and warmth that is indeed rare in the dark world they know. At the very least, it's delightfully reassuring and full of signature Star Wars charm. But at the most, the Bad Batch's story has the potential to provoke a shift in action and attitude among the viewers who've most felt the plight of these characters. Though the experiences of military veterans in the US has received far more of a spotlight than it did even a few decades ago, it's rare to find a story as accessible as Star Wars that manages to tell their story in a human and sympathetic way. Of course, I could be attributing depth and intention to a story where it simply wasn't purposeful by its creators, but art, as the saying goes, can be an empathy machine, capable of generating emotion and understanding of things we otherwise wouldn't experience. So if you have felt for these characters, whether through my analysis or what was presented on screen, then that opens a door that, regardless of what opens it, should be opened. A door to change. Though the VA has taken several steps to address the veteran crisis in America over the last decade, a considerable amount of work remains in certain areas. Among the 18 million veterans living in the US, an estimated 37,000 of those veterans were homeless in 2020. As of 2016, at least 1.1 million veterans are diagnosed with PTSD, schizophrenia, depression, or another severe mental illness. And in 2020, the suicide rate was 1.5 times higher for veterans than non-veterans, as nearly 18 veterans commit suicide every day. Thankfully, there are several community outreach programs in towns and cities across the country to help veterans find their footing and reintegrate into civilian life. Nonprofit organizations like the Veterans of Foreign Affairs and Disabled American Veterans use their funding to provide basic services, run community events, support educational and employment opportunities, provide counseling, spread awareness, and help American servicemen and women rehabilitate. And if you are a veteran or are concerned about a veteran, the Veteran Crisis Line is open every 24 hours to connect with a qualified responder who can help you through thoughts of crisis. Links to all these resources and more will be posted in the description below this video. If there's any organization you'd also like to highlight, leave a comment below and I will add it to the description. There are many ways to help veterans, but if you ask me, there's no greater service we can offer each other than by dedicating ourselves to a mission of compassion. Then until we exemplify the courage to show it and stand up for it, The forces that divide our communities, families, and homes will never magically go away. Of course, compassion is nothing without action, and sometimes the most compassionate action isn't always obvious, nor always received in kind. But by using our gifts to help those in need, and responsibly remove from power those who spread fear, distrust, or anger, the safety and comfort of stability we're all entitled to as human beings may not be exclusive to any one person, party, demographic, or culture, but accessible and attainable by all. As a goal, it's admittedly lofty as hell and somewhat unrealistic. But if it inspires you as it has inspired me, then who knows what good we can accomplish. Until Season 2, if you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire the Bad Batch. Hello everyone, welcome to the end of the video. Congratulations on getting here. It was another long one, of course, but thank you for clicking on it and watching it regardless. And thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Just even a little bit of their support helps this video become that much more possible. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video. I know this wasn't just the Bad Batch, but also an opportunity to talk about what I felt was a very important issue. Hopefully it came across respectfully and responsibly. You know, having not served in the military, the best I can really do is try to listen and learn as much as I can about a topic such as this, and just try to pass on what I've heard and what I know, and you know, try not to err or try not to misrepresent anything, because I do have a platform and I do feel very responsible what I say with that platform. So hopefully at least a little bit of what I said has resonated with you. And of course, you know, I mentioned all those nonprofit veteran organizations. Even if you don't have the money to support, I do and still encourage you to go in the description below and at least inform yourself a bit more about, you know, sort of the veteran crisis in our country, in America anyway, for American viewers watching. There's a couple of like TED Talks and interesting articles that I came across in my research that it'd probably mean a lot to you know, not just me but veterans out there to be more informed about. So check that out in the description below. But yeah, if you enjoy this video and you want to follow me further, you can follow me on Twitter at ParksHarmon. Follow me on Instagram. My handle is ParksHarmon there as well. You can also follow me on Twitch at or twitch.tv/Cytor. I don't really stream very often, nor do I post on Instagram very often, but both of those, you know, content for both of those platforms is in the works, TM. Other than that, if you guys want to check out more, of course, if this is your first Star Wars video of mine that you're watching, I have a bunch of other Star Wars videos that I've done, including on Star Wars The Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, Jedi Fallen Order, and of course there'll be more Star Wars videos in the future, not for the rest of the year because the year's almost over, but there will be more next year for sure. And if you want to maybe step outside of that a little bit, I do have a video on Mass Effect you can check out. It didn't get a lot of views, but it's very worth checking out, especially if you're looking forward to the Knights of the Old Republic remake that's coming out. Mass Effect in many ways is sort of an answer to what BioWare would have done differently had they the chance to remake KOTOR when they originally released it. So check that out, and if you did enjoy the video and you've already seen it, do look forward to a video on Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3, both hopefully coming before the end of the year. I'm gonna try and work extra hard. I know videos have been kind of sparse this year, but you know, I'm feeling really good about the next few months, I think. But yeah, again, guys, thank you for the support, and thank you for watching. As always, may the Force be with you. I'll see you next time.